The Reform UK meltdown about the launch of Restore Britain has been astonishing, and it hasn't been enjoyable because people that I've considered friends have been unduly insulting about men they know in real life. This isn't a game, it's not a WWE match, we're trying to fix our country. But unfortunately, many of the people in Reform UK don't see it that way. They see Rupert as having the potential to split their vote, deprive them of the voters they feel entitled to, and rob not just Nigel Farage of 10 Downing Street, but all of those below him of safe seats, peerages, and a very lucrative patronage system that would be awarded to them if they won an election. And so, the most egregious claim comes from Reform's London mayoral candidate Laila Cunningham, who accused my friend Charlie Downs of being a Nazi.
They're talking about if you're not white and Christian in this country, you're not British. Right? They're going back to some kind of like neo-Nazi Aryan race. If you're not white, I've heard their spokesperson on Talk TV and on TV saying if you are not white and Christian, then you're not deemed to be British. And you know, that flies in the face of wanting integration and assimilation, because no matter how much you integrate or assimilate, according to them, you will never be British.
Well, look, they're not here to defend themselves right now.
So first of all, that isn't true, and we'll get on to Charlie's remarks later. But allow me to invert Laila Cunningham's formulation here. The idea that this flies in the face of assimilation and integration. Well, what happens, Laila, if you violate the British values-based identity that Reform is putting forward? Danny Kruger said that Reform believes in an inclusive civic nationalism where anyone from any background or any religion can become British. Nigel Farage says being English is a matter of how you feel and what your priorities are, and that being Welsh is someone who has lived in Wales for 5 to 10 years. Meaning Axel Rudikabana would have been Welsh. So what happens, Laila, if you violate British values? Something that you consistently repeat in your media appearances. Well, if you're born in Britain but don't believe in British values, are you still British? Is Axel Rudikabana British? Are the perpetrators of the Pakistani grooming gangs and those who knew about it and covered it up because the victims were white British girls, are they still British? If not, then you should have no worry about deporting them, no matter whether or not they were born here or hold British passports. But if they are, then what is the point of British values? Clearly, values do not make someone British, because if you violate the values, there is no consequence to that. It is clearly ancestry and heritage, something which Laila Cunningham herself has admitted in a previous Good Morning Britain appearance where she says, well, no, I'm not ethnically British. So that means that she recognises there are native ancestries to Britain, the English, the Welsh, the Scottish and the Irish, and belonging to those groups is conferred upon people by parentage. That doesn't mean that people with other ancestries and other heritages are necessarily bad people. Many of us have friends and family members who are of different ethnic extractions, and they can belong to our club, for want of a better word. But that doesn't mean that we get to deny our heritage any more than Laila Cunningham's home country, Egypt, would say that anyone from anywhere can move there, self-identify as Egyptian, or become as indistinguishably Egyptian as the Egyptians by signing up to Egyptian values. They have an ethnically exclusive citizenship policy, and it wouldn't be unreasonable if Britain were to pursue that any more than it is unreasonable for Israel, India, or Japan to do the same. But Reform has been deploying its media surrogates across the airwaves, and not just on GB News, where the majority of Restore Britain's representatives are banned, but also they've been going on Talk TV quite frequently, and Laila Cunningham hasn't really made up her mind on the threat that Restore Britain poses, because she insists in this Plank of the Week appearance nobody's even heard of Rupert Lowe, which begs the question, what are you worried about then?
Won't they take votes away from Reform?
There was a poll.
They won't? They won't?
Because there was a poll that showed the...
Well, who will they take votes away from?
None, they won't take any
Communists?
votes. They won't take any votes. Nobody knows who Rupert is.
You've all misread this poll. Because Rupert now gets to write his
Excuse
own...
me, God has something to say.
Basically, this poll actually is in favour of Rupert because he gets to write his own narrative. Nigel Farage is going into the next general election with a favourability rating of minus, I think it's minus 62, 63. More people in the country hate him than like him.
Is that why we're topping 200 polls?
That's because they like the party. Because you've not had the mobilised...
But hang on.
You've not had any of it yet.
Everyone says it's a one-man band, so you can't like the party without liking Farage. You can't have it both ways. You can't say it's a one-man band.
I look at Caerphilly.
And then no one likes Reform.
Laila Cunningham's quite unlikable. She does shriek and shout a lot, and what she says doesn't have much substance. She tends to escalate her voice and her rhetoric to sound authoritative when it instead just comes across as grating. But people are supporting Reform UK because they are desperate to throw a brick through the Overton window. They are desperate to rebel against the Uniparty, and they thought that Reform was the teal battering ram to the castle doors of Labour, Lib Dem and the Tories. Very much the same way that young women and immigrants are supporting the Green Party because they think it represents an authentic left alternative to the recaptured Labour Party after Jeremy Corbyn was expelled and your party descended into profiteering and infighting. Now, Laila Cunningham is referencing this JL Partners poll that was commissioned by GB News, which of course Nigel Farage has shares in, presents, occasionally, a very popular show on and gets paid hundreds of thousands of pounds to do so. And this poll says that Nigel Farage is most recognised among the three men who used to be in Reform UK, including Rupert Lowe and Ben Habib. 76% recognise Nigel Farage compared to only 8% of Rupert Lowe. Now, let's say that this is a reliable poll. Well, as Peter Barnes points out, that means that Rupert Lowe has a blank slate with which to make a positive impression with the public. Because Nigel Farage, across multiple polls, has a pretty bad reputation with the public. And that's after he went on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, right before he returned to frontline politics, ran as an MP in Clacton, in probably the safest seat possible for Reform, according to the polling at the time, and has now propelled himself to the top of the polls, at least with his party. And Nigel Farage has one of the worst unfavourability ratings in the country, outpaced only by Keir Starmer, the most hated Prime Minister on record in British history. So, Nigel Farage should, by all means, be the uncontested opposition, but as we've seen in repeated polls, Reform have slumped in the polls by anywhere between 3 to 10 points over the last few months. They should have a commanding lead, but they don't, and at the moment, it's looking dicey as to whether they would ever form an outright majority if a general election were to be called quite soon. Keir Starmer appointed Peter Mandelson as the US ambassador, who was the mentor to Morgan McSweeney, the man who made Starmer's career. There is the looming scandal of a number of Ukrainian young male models firebombing his front door, as well as other problems with his personal life that have yet to be reported on. Starmer is robbing the pockets of pensioners, of farmers, of hard-working taxpayers. He has unleashed criminals on our streets with an early release scheme. He called the entire country far-right after a second-generation Rwandan butchered children at a dance class. So, Keir Starmer is hated by both his own Labour supporters and the broader country who share people like Rupert Lowe's opinions on immigration and the death penalty. And so Nigel Farage should be walking away with this, but as Dan Hodges, who himself is a Labour supporter, and who, funnily enough, Gwaine Towler went to in the UKIP days to run UKIP's candidates by, so they could vet them via hope not hate, so he's not exactly a right-winger. As he pointed out in the Mail, Nigel Farage has inflicted a number of wounds with his own base by ostracising Rupert Lowe, denouncing mass deportations, appeasing Islam, and taking in too many Tory defectors, and at the same time has a hell of a lot of baggage over the decades as being Mr. Brexit, as coming back and forth in politics, leading UKIP, leading the Brexit Party, leading Reform, stepping down from all three, then returning. So he has left a bad taste in the mouth of many people, those who have worked with him, and the broader public who have a bad impression of him. And this is repeated across multiple polls, especially with the youth vote that Nigel Farage covets. This is from a poll from ITV via Savanta that found that 51% of those aged 16 to 25, and remember 16-year-olds will be able to vote if Keir Starmer passes that bill at the next election, 51% view both politicians, both Starmer and Farage, unfavourably. More young people prefer Farage to Starmer, with only 9% saying they view Reform UK with strong favourability compared to just 6% with the Prime Minister. So he is only 3 points higher among young people than Keir Starmer. For all the boasting about his TikTok numbers in the world, this really isn't making that much of a dent. Now, granted, demographics do not favour reform in the under 30s, and until now, young white men are overwhelmingly voting reform compared to the other parties on offer. But if you have an authentically right-wing party who has a better social media game than you, which is where all the young white men are, and you have a number of young white guys in that party, Charlie Downs, Harrison Pitt, Lewis Brackpool, Montgomery Toms, myself, versus Reform UK, who has Laila Cunningham, Zia Yussuf, Nadim Zahawi, I mean, who do you think is going to resonate more with that young white male voter base who are very politically engaged and pretty rightly pissed off about the state of their country and the fact that their inheritance has been squandered on grievance projects for sexual and racial minority groups? Those same minority groups that Reform UK seem more interested in courting than maintaining and consolidating their base. This is persistent across multiple polls. Ipsos Mori has Nigel Farage on a 31% favourability, which is the highest of any politician, but only by 1 point versus Andy Burnham, which is why probably Keir Starmer was far too worried to let him run in Gorton and Denton. But he has a 48% unfavourability rate, which is the highest of any political party leader, so he is very polarizing or divisive. Now, that's not something that I care about. Divisive is just a term used to slander people with sensible policies by the establishment who want to tightly control the remit of the policies that are allowed on things like immigration, the economy, identity politics. But Nigel Farage is very, very concerned about being called divisive, racist, populist even. And so, by his own rhetorical metrics, by Reform UK's defenders' metrics, Nigel Farage is failing to persuade a large portion of the public. And Reform's saving grace is that until now, it has been the only, de facto, right-wing populist party on offer. Well, if Restore comes in, and in a week is already at 80,000 members, is registering with the Electoral Commission, has international acclaim thanks to the likes of Caleb Hammer, Elon Musk and Asmongold, has increasing levels of elite support from Duncan Bannatyne, John Cleese, prospectively Jeremy Clarkson, then it could just eat Reform's lunch. Remember, we have more time between now and the next general election than between now and the last general election. Reform were at 30% in the polls just a few months ago, and they've now dipped down to the mid to low 20s. Everything can change in less than a year, let alone 3. And Nigel Farage's personal conduct and public reputation isn't actually helping Reform. And what about Cunningham's assertion that nobody knows Rupert Lowe? This was a video by Aaron Bastani about a week before Restore Britain announced their party. He was going around Gorton and Denton, the constituency where the Greens are currently leading the polls and Matt Goodwin is fighting for his life as Reform's candidate, and he was asking members of the public who would they like to be Prime Minister, and he stumbled upon this chap in the street, and he gave a pretty direct answer.
Who would you like to see being PM?
PM?
Yeah, Prime Minister.
Rupert Lowe.
Patriot, thank you for your service. Important to note, this was before Restore's launch, before a week of Restore Britain social media coverage, where Rupert is getting millions of views on Twitter and Facebook. And reminder for those like Spiked Online saying this is a very online or purely online phenomenon, who do you think has social media accounts? It's real people who will then share social media links in WhatsApp chats with their friends and family members who will talk about it down the pub or at dinner. People are only one step removed from their terminally online friends and relatives. I know this because I'm sure you would say to me, I am very online, and almost every time I go into London I get stopped and recognised. People have tried to buy me drinks, and I am a nobody compared to Rupert Lowe and the numbers that he is pulling in and the great work he has done, which is why I recognise that he has leadership qualities, and like this guy, I would like to see him walk through the door of 10 Downing Street. So if you can walk up to random people in Gorton and Denton, this contested by-election constituency, and find people that say they would prefer Rupert Lowe to be Prime Minister, it would be very unwise for Reform UK to go on an all-out attack against Rupert Lowe, who used to be in their party, is beloved by their membership. A lot of their membership laments the fact that Nigel Farage and Zia Yussuf kicked him out the party, as Nigel now admits, with a police report that turns out to have been completely spurious and false, because Rupert supported mass deportations, and Nigel said in his Telegraph column shortly after kicking out Rupert that that was a, quote, dark and dangerous use of rhetoric. So It's very unwise to piss off your base who like Rupert Lowe, who wish he was still in the party, and, by proxy, accuse Restore of splitting the vote, robbing Reform of a government that they are entitled to, and also calling Restore far-right fringe, racist, fascists and Nazis. Very unwise if you're fighting for every vote you can get, because you're not estranging Green voters who might have thought about voting Reform. Instead, you're estranging your own voters who thought that you stood for the same thing as Rupert despite personal differences, who like Rupert personally, and now will not show up and vote for you because you have insulted them by insulting Rupert. And after the launch of Restore Britain, we've had our savvy Zoomers like Montgomery Toms just go out in the street. Get out there and ask regular people whether or not they recognise Rupert Lowe and what they think of him.
Do you know this man?
Yes, Rupert Lowe.
What do you think of him?
I quite like him, actually.
Why do you think that?
I like what he says. I like what he stands for. And he could make a very good Prime Minister.
Do you know this man?
Yeah.
What do you think of him?
He's what we need at the moment, I think.
Yeah, why'd you say that? What makes him different to Farage?
I don't know. He's more of a nationalist, isn't he? More for the country.
What do you think of him?
I think he's a good guy.
Why do you think he's a top man?
Because I think he's talking about what all British people want him to talk about.
Do you know that they've gained 70,000 members in just a few days?
What, loads will up?
Yeah.
Well, they probably would, they?
Overtaken the Lib Dems.
They will do, yeah.
And how do you feel that the mainstream media is painting out like nobody knows who Rupert Lowe is, when actually I've been walking up and down this high street and found many people like yourself?
Yeah. Are you surprised?
No.
That's what the mainstream media do. If they don't like somebody or doesn't suit them, they ignore them.
And what do you think of, his much stronger and honest just approach to migration in this country?
It's got to be spoken about. You can't just turn around and say, oh, it's far right, it's this, you're Nazi and this, that. It's got to be spoken about.
How do you feel that the mainstream media is saying, oh, nobody knows who Rupert Lowe is? Do you think that's true?
Because that's the mainstream media.
Would you become a member of Restore?
I consider it. At this stage, I will consider it.
So does Britain need Restore?
Yes.
Does Britain need Rupert Lowe?
Yes.
Why do you think Rupert Lowe is a good guy? Why do you say that?
Why? Same as me. Can't say it on the telly.
Deport?
That's right.
Side note, Restore Britain needs to get this guy to narrate all of their campaign ads because he has a fantastic radio voice. But clearly, if you can find people in real life who know Rupert Lowe and hold him in high regard, and, well, I don't think that we got much verbal abuse, because otherwise, of course, the social media incentives would be out there to put those clips out and farm them for attention. If Montgomery isn't getting a strong allergic reaction akin to milkshakes being thrown over him, as Farage despicably has had done to him before, then it means that Rupert has the chance to make a positive impression with many members of the public, and he's doing it based on issues and integrity, not a bingo night at Butlin's razzmatazz with pyrotechnics, confetti, and balloons raining from the ceiling, at a time where things are so grave in this country that we have thousands of girls being trafficked, raped, murdered, and taken as sex slaves to the Middle East. It seems a little bit tasteless to be doing that as if we have time for that frivolity when we're staring down the barrel of demographic and cultural obsolescence. Angloid went out and did the same. He's got a pretty strong Twitter presence, but he's not got a very big YouTube channel, so go and type him in the search bar. He just went out onto his local street and asked young lads if they knew who Rupert Lowe was.
Excuse me, mate. Do you know who this is?
Yeah, Rupert Lowe.
What do you think about him?
Fucking G.
Come on, bro. Well, what do you think? Have you heard about his new political party?
Yeah.
What do you think about it? Yeah.
One to vote for.
Better than Reform?
Yeah, 100%. Nigel Farage is never going to be the geezer to run the country.
Why do you think that?
Because he's a wet wipe.
Okay.
He's not got what it takes to be unpopular.
So you think he's trying to appease to the left wing and to the centre, and he's part of the establishment essentially, Nigel Farage?
He's the guy.
Have a good day, mate.
What a clue, mate.
All right, well, have a good day. Excuse me, mate, do you know who this is?
Yeah, that's Rupert Lowe.
What do you think about him?
I think he's brilliant. He'd make an excellent Prime Minister.
And he's just started his own party, Restore Britain. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely good news for Britain. Hopefully we get rid of all these third world fuck-ups and people that hate this country, the rapists, the terrorists and the bloody lot.
So are you going to vote?
And stop wasting money on foreign aid when we need it here.
Better than Reform UK, you would say?
Yes.
Okay.
To an extent, I haven't heard all of his policies yet, but he's definitely he's got the brains about him to do it and put it right.
Well, he got kicked out of Reform for wanting mass deportations.
What's wrong with that?
Exactly, that's what I think.
If this guy's watching, you're a patriot, though perhaps consider getting a different haircut. Very telling, though, that not only can Angloid go out and find quite a few members of the public who have heard of Rupert Lowe and hold a positive opinion of him because he has credibility on a number of issues that they are concerned about, but they are relieved that he allows them to unmuzzle themselves on those issues by giving them permission to speak up about something which, without elite support from someone like Rupert Lowe, a frontline politician, a farmer, a successful businessman, would have cost them socially and professionally to talk about. But they should be entitled to do so because it's their country, it's in a right royal state, and we have to fix it. And also, the other thing to point out, don't underestimate the power of in-shape, decent-looking young lads voicing your opinions. All I'm saying is, the young lads in Restore cut a meaner side profile than the people on the front lines of Reform. And speaking of aesthetics, Matt Goodwin, who is currently fighting for his life in Gorton and Denton against the Green Party, and who yet decided to attack people on X who like Rupert Lowe instead, posted this photo recently, and he said, "This is a great picture, vote Reform." So, vote Reform if you want more of this, I suppose. For our audio listeners, this is a Reform sign over a shop, a halal kebab and pizza shop, right next to an Afro-Caribbean salon with a poster for the Black Hebrew Israelites New Year's Fellowship Party, which is about a month out of date on it. So proper UK aesthetics, right? Y-O-O-K-A-Y. And so the idea that it was good to associate a Reform UK sign with this? Disastrous. And it's because it communicates that this not only has Reform's approval, but even if it had Reform's disapproval, they're going to do nothing about having these things here. The people that run these shops, that frequent these businesses, to whom this way of life is organic, to whom these aesthetics are acceptable, will be here forever under a Reform government. Because remember, Reform UK, according to Laila Cunningham's new recent policy announcement, will not stop foreign nationals from claiming social housing. They'll just put them to the back of the queue. Which, because they're not seeking to actually repeal and replace the Equalities Act, they're still looking to keep equalities protections on the books, will be defeated in a matter of nanoseconds as violating the statutory equality duties of public bodies, because you're discriminating on the basis of national origin, or race, or ethnicity, or whatever other penumbra of reasons that they choose to block the policy. Instead, Restore Britain will not only repeal the Equalities Act and the Human Rights Act, and be very comfortable with discrimination, it will block all foreign-born individuals, whether or not they've been given British passports, from ever accessing the NHS, free at the point of use, social housing, any form of benefits, any translation services, and it will ban non-stun and non-lethal stun halal slaughter, which means you won't have any of these dodgy kebab and pizza shops populating your high streets with ugly signs anymore. Vote accordingly. And when Harrison Pitt pointed this aesthetic disparity offered by the visions of the respective parties out, Matt Goodwin responded, "You guys have completely misinterpreted this post. You are terminally online, which reveals itself in all manner of ways. Get out more." A couple of things here. It's a bit ironic for someone who makes his living off Substack to say anyone else is terminally online. Also, as Harrison points out, Matt Goodwin posts much more regularly on X than Harrison, by a factor of 4 to 6 times, which is why he has a much larger following than Harrison. So he actually specs way more into his online presence than Harrison does. Also, Harrison once caught Matt Goodwin in a bit of a bind because he was saying, "You're so concerned that by 2063 white Britons will be a minority, but your party, Reform UK, don't care about that demographic change. How do you reconcile that?" And Matt said, "Well, it's fine because Birmingham voted for Brexit." Now, that's not only not true, but ethnic minorities in Birmingham did not vote for Brexit, whereas the white British in Birmingham were much more likely to have voted for Brexit. It had probably something to do with living next to the ethnic ghettos and foreign colonies set up in places like Gorton, as embodied by the halal takeaways and African hair shops that Matt thought looked good. But just a word of advice. Much like Matt Goodwin in Gorton and Denton, who has Rupert Lowe fans in his constituency, and, well, given the tightness of the by-election, he can't afford to lose those votes, and so probably shouldn't insult those voters. More broadly, Reform UK shouldn't be supporting people who are wayward supporters of Reform because of how they've treated now the newly minted members of Restore, but also their own branches, councillors, and members of their base. For example, George Finch, who is a Reform councillor, a pretty prominent one, who, by all accounts, has tried to do some good work in cutting woke waste on the council, so I'm not insulting the man, greeted the news that Luke Cooper and Scott Cameron have defected to Restore Britain as councillors, total patriots, welcome aboard lads, with good riddance before swiftly deleting it. This is the same line that Kemi used about Suella and Robert Jenrick, and it didn't go down well for her because the Tories continue to fall off in the polls. That prophesied Kemi bounce for the Tories turns out to have been Kemi Badenoch standing over the edge of an electoral cliff like Wile E. Coyote, and only plummeting after looking down and realising she was standing on nothing but air. I dare say Reform are going to put themselves in the same place if they continue to insult their voters in this way. But back to Cunningham's accusation that Restore Britain are just a party of Nazis. Michael Mosbacher, who is a Jewish journalist who has written for The Telegraph, has said that Rupert Lowe's dog whistling proves his new party is unfit for office, and the entire piece was about our ban on non-stun and non-lethal stun slaughter, which happens to catch both kosher and halal. And it's because it's brutal to animals, it's not in keeping with Britain's traditions, we don't like it, and we are well within our rights, as a nation, with a sovereign nation state, to ban it. And I said as much in my response to Michael, where I opened with, "Hello Michael, we met in Hungary last year. I've actually written the Restore Britain paper on banning non-stun and non-lethal stun slaughter. It responds to arguments made in your previous article on the subject from the 28th of December 2025, so I'm sure you'll take great care to read our report when it's published. There are no dog whistles at all. Restore Britain has a very clear position. Non-stun and non-lethal stunned halal ritual slaughter offends the majority of the British public in repeated polls because we are a nation of animal lovers. This is something that Roger Scruton and George Orwell have written about, on different sides of the political spectrum, decades apart, and yet they've observed that the English's affinity to animals is an innate cultural trait of our people that just isn't shared by other peoples and their traditions and cultures. We like it, we want to protect it, thank you very much. A basic principle of national sovereignty is the ability to make laws in the interests of the native majority of your nation. We don't like non-stun slaughter, and so we want to ban it. For those who object, there are plenty of vegetarian or cultured meat alternatives on offer, something Israel is actually pioneering, by the way. Otherwise, there are other countries around the world that will cater to their preferences. Those countries do things their way, we will do things our way. Calling us names won't dissuade us, I'm afraid. And Michael decided the best comparison to make between slitting the throat of an animal and letting it bleed to death was spitting out your chewing gum on the street. Quote, "The most worrying part of your reply is, we don't like non-stun slaughter and so we want to ban it. There are all sorts of things we don't like. I don't like chewing gum. Think it's frankly disgusting. Doesn't mean I want to ban it." Predictably, and we're seeing a pattern here, anyone trying to run to the defense of reform is getting ratioed into the Earth's core. Now, while you do so, I must point out, keep it gentlemanly, because we, with our faces to things, don't want to spend all our time being forced to deflect away from antagonistic rhetoric by some of the more rambunctious members of the base. I'm as angry as you guys are, don't get me wrong, but we want to aspire to the same level of gentlemanly conduct that Rupert himself does. The facts are on our side, we can talk about the issues, we don't have to resort to insults, let's be sane, let's be sensible, and rather than fighting a optics battle, let's just present our case to the British public, who already agree with us on a bunch of issues, and don't have a party to represent themselves yet, and win that way instead. And the fact that we have the nation on our side, and that their case doesn't stand up to scrutiny, is obvious yet again in the undiluted ratio that I provided to Mr. Mosbacher. Slitting the throat of a sheep or a cow and watching it bleed out for minutes in preventable agony is different to a reprobate spitting out their gum on the pavement, Michael. Restore Britain are willing to ban that barbaric practice. Calling us names won't change that. It isn't about being vindictive. It's about propriety and our duty as a nation of animal lovers, and that's why the majority of the British public supports the ban. we should be able to respond to any smears with "we don't care." And so we should try our best not to give the enemy any ammunition for guilt by association smears by amplifying potential agent provocateurs either from enemy parties or even from the state, something I'll be getting onto later. And the attempt to associate Restore Britain with rhetoric that the majority of the public might find objectionable because nobody wants to be needlessly cruel to people has been ubiquitous. And someone who's been doing this quite frequently, it's sad to say because it's someone I've considered a friend, I've worked with and travelled with, is Alex Phillips. She's been doing this on X, but also on her show on Talk, to the dismay of quite a lot of her viewers who are saying, hey, look, Alex, I'm a reform voter, but I'm finding this to be a bit obsessive and frankly shrill and unlistenable. Maybe tone it down a notch. And this all began when Charlie Downs was invited onto her show to make the case for Restore Britain, and they got into the definition of who the British are.
If Britain's a people and a nation, well, that to me sounds like saying Britain is being sentimentally attached to the country. Britain is living here. It's being brought up here. It's being, you know, what do you mean that's different to Reform UK? I need to understand this. Make it clear. Explain it to me like I'm 5.
Well, Reform's position from their very beginning has been no different to Blair's position, to Cameron's position, which is that Britishness is defined by adherence to British values. This is a term that I have been hearing for my entire life. It was something that I was taught when I was in primary and secondary school, that that's what it means to be British. And if you look at the law, British values are defined as democracy, tolerance, the rule of law, and mutual respect and tolerance of those with different faiths and beliefs. Now that, in my view, is nothing at all to do with what it means to be British, because the majority of British people throughout our 1,000-year history have not believed in these values. These are a creation of the Blairite state over the last.
So what is it to be? So explain to me what is it that you're saying makes someone British that is different to what they're saying?
Well, it's a far deeper thing than that, Alex. It's about a connection to this land. It's about an ancestry here.
Okay, but connection to land, isn't that what Matt Goodwin said to you, though?
Please let me finish here. More than anything, it is Christian faith. It is ancestry and it's Christian faith.
So if you're not a Christian, you can't be British?
Well, I mean, you are certainly, I think, less British if you're not a believer in Christian principles. If somebody was Islamic, then they are certainly less British, yeah.
Now, Downs is a friend, and I'm never going to throw him under the bus. I mean, the man came to my wedding. He's like a brother to me. I'm just going to try and clarify here, because I think what tripped people up is him saying more than anything it is Christian faith. I know for a fact Charlie Downs would never say that someone who can convert to Christianity in another country and therefore claim to be as British as someone whose ancestors stretch back to Hengist and Horsa, even though they've never visited. That is not his position. That is not Restore Britain's position. It certainly isn't my position. Being British is a matter of ancestry, as he said. It is your connection to the land through your lineage. You have to have at least one parent who is English, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish. Those are the indigenous peoples of Britain, and no matter how the borders and territories and names might have changed from Hadrian's Wall to the Troubles in Ulster, those are our people, and those are our primary concern when we're talking about political representation and when we're talking about policy making. That doesn't mean we need to be cruel, unjust, inconsiderate of people with other backgrounds who are a part of our club, our tribe, our friendships, and our family networks, because Alex then raised the prospect of her stepsister, who presumably is not ethnically British, otherwise she wouldn't have raised her, and so by her own example she admits there are distinctions between British people ethnically and non-British people ethnically, so she recognises the difference. That doesn't mean we need to be cruel to those people. That doesn't mean, and this is not Restore Britain's position, by the way, that we need to go down the route of removing everyone from the country of a different ancestry. Because that would be inconsiderate, unjust, and cruel. Everything should be done on the basis of incentives, economics, and the behaviours of people, which is why Restore Britain's policy is pretty clear, actually. Deport all foreign criminals, deport all illegal immigrants, ban practices we don't like Sharia law, niqabs, burqas, non-stun slaughter, withdraw all financial state assistance for translation services, for benefits, social housing, NHS care, from foreign-born individuals, regardless of whether or not they have a British passport. If you come here, you need to be able to support yourself across your lifetime, and we know that most don't, so most people who are living here at taxpayers' expense will just return home of their own accord. This is a much stronger policy offering than any other party, while also not being needlessly cruel to people who, through no fault of their own, don't have any native ancestry on these isles. While we shouldn't be cruel to those people, it also means we shouldn't be confused as to who we're talking about when we say British, and who has our primary concern in the British political system. By the way, that also means that non-Brits, those without any ancestry, at least one parent who is native, will not be able to vote in our elections, for example. Commonwealth citizens should not be able to vote in our elections. We are totally mad for allowing people on visitor visas to have a say over who should be the Prime Minister in our country. And likewise, foreign nationals should not be allowed to run in our elections. First-generation immigrants without any native ancestry should not be able to become MPs or councillors. And reminder, Reform UK is currently running a Bangladeshi Boris Wave migrant on a student visa who plans to go and work in Dubai and, quote, return to his homeland someday as a council candidate at the local elections. Restore Britain won't be doing that. The point I will make on Christian faith, and it's not that if you stop being Christian, you stop being British. Keir Starmer is a traitor because he has British ancestry. He is from our in-group, and he is selling us out, regardless of being an atheist. I think Charlie's broader point is that we would not be the same people if not for the Christian faith. The Venerable Bede would not have recognised us as the land of Angles. We wouldn't have the common law stemming from King Alfred the Great's Doom Book, which had the Ten Commandments in the front and had its number of laws equal to that of the years lived by the prophet Moses. And also, remember, it was the first Archbishop of Canterbury, and later the Catholic Church, which ratified the ban on cousin marriage in our country, which meant that we had nuclearized family units, small farm holdings. It meant that we were entrepreneurial and considerate and extended manners to those outside of our immediate family environment. It produced the take people as you meet them individualistic attitude of the English. It's why we're a much more high-trust society. So Christianity certainly shaped our culture, and it's why the likes of secular humanist organisations, which have actually been champions on the non-stun slaughter bans, something that obviously I'm writing a paper on, it's why they are operating, whether they like to admit it or not, on Christian assumptions. This is the argument that Tom Holland makes in his book Dominion, and I don't think Tom Holland agrees with me on politics, but I think he is certainly correct that even modern progressivism takes a lot of the Christian compassion for the weak and the vulnerable for granted. So I think Charlie is correct in saying that Christianity has shaped a lot of British traditions, but being British is not about being Christian any more than being Japanese is about being Shinto. And Alex Phillips knows this because after Charlie went off air, she read out some viewer comments and was both appalled and confused at the suggestion that Britain is comprised of ethnic groups rather than being a matter of self-identification, like a man putting on a dress and calling himself a woman.
Restore Britain believe British people are an ethnicity. We are a race, we are a demographic. Every other political party has a nebulous view of Britain and British people. Okay, so if British people are a race, my stepsister is not British then? I'm sorry, I don't understand. If you're going to say it, just say it. Say the quiet part out loud, okay? This is what I'm going to say to Restore Britain. Just say the quiet part out loud so we know. Otherwise, it just sounds like reform, but apparently it's not.
I don't know what ancestry Alex Phillips' stepsister is, but if she doesn't have any English, Welsh, Scottish or Irish ancestry, no, she's not British. Doesn't mean she's not a nice person. Doesn't mean she stops being your stepsister. It doesn't mean you don't love her. It doesn't mean that she doesn't deserve moral consideration and to be treated equally in the eyes of the law, Alex. It just means that we are a distinct ethnic group, we are a nation, and we deserve to have a country that is populated by that nation, by those people. just as Jews do in Israel, or the Japanese do in Japan, or Indians do in India, or pretty much every other ethnic group or tribe has had throughout history before we got drunk on suicidal empathy under woke ideology. And as much as she didn't like that this screenshot was circulating, Alex herself knows this because last October she wrote a Substack saying "Make science racist again." For too long it has been taboo to even acknowledge ethnic differences in our biological makeup, but doing so would fundamentally help address issues. Now, I agree with her. It would ameliorate tensions between ethnic groups if we just acknowledged facts. Things like bone density or susceptibility to different diseases like sickle cell anemia. It's very important actually to do this in healthcare, to make sure that people aren't unduly suffering. That's completely correct. So, if you acknowledge that there are ethnic differences and that there is no moral content about this, then someone saying that Britain is comprised of distinct ethnic groups and British culture, or British values insofar as they exist, come from those people. You can't separate the culture and the values from the people. You can't keep and continue the culture and the values without the people. That shouldn't be contentious at all, because that's not a moral judgment on another people, any more than it is to say that the Japanese language comes from Japanese people, or that Africans tend to do better in long-distance running, for example. These are all non-moral evaluations. They're not the basis of policy. It's just so we can have a sense of self, a pre-political we, as Roger Scruton wrote about, so that we know who we are representing, who has our primary moral concern, and that is the indigenous, forgotten, neglected host majority of the British Isles, who carry our culture, our folkways, and our traditions in their hearts, for whom it is easier to rekindle that fondness for that culture than to transplant it into another people. And, until now, do not have a party to represent them, because every other party is populated by people whose primary concern is minoritarian interests, including, for example, Reform UK, who are desperate to court the Muslim vote, have set up multiple Jewish Alliance and Friends of Israel chapters, who are posing for photos with Sikhs in teal turbans. I'm not saying any of those people are bad, and I'm not saying Restore Britain should be in the business of discouraging anyone to vote for them, but what I am saying is the messaging being put out is minority groups are our primary concern, and so we're taking the majority for granted at the very moment that the majority's status as the majority is in question, because we are ticking down the years to the point where we are a demographic minority in our own land. That is a suicidal strategy, not just electorally, as things get worse with immigration and demographics, but for civilization writ large, and so we're just not going to engage in minoritarian pandering going forward. Alex then continued her debates with Young Bob on Talk TV, and I do happen to notice that Rupert Lowe has been invited on by Kevin O'Sullivan in the evenings, because Kevin, the man who gave me my start in radio, is a top guy, but other people haven't been invited on GB News, bar Lewis Brackpool, to make the defence for Restore Britain, and other people haven't been invited on other shows on Talk TV, other than lads like Young Bob, who is just a supporter of the party, he's not an official spokesperson, or Charlie Downs, who has been invited on twice now to defend the party's reputation. I believe I'm still banned. Carl Benjamin is banned, and he's a prominent supporter and a little bit older and perhaps a bit more rhetorically capable of defending the party, which is why I suppose they're inviting some of the young lads on, hoping to trip them up and being shocked at their rhetorical prowess, because Bob did a very good job here. So it seems to me that there is a really quite malicious effort to scupper Restore Britain's chances as it's taking off from the launchpad. And I think that's because there's a lot riding on Reform UK, because, think about it, all of the Farage loyalists, the die-hard members of UKIP and the Brexit Party, the people who have jumped aboard Reform as it started to gain momentum, who have made their careers in Reform now, where do they go after this if Reform capsizes, if it doesn't succeed, if they don't get safe seats or peerages, if they aren't part of the patronage network, being rewarded for their long years in the trenches defending Reform's reputation from accusations of racism, which they're still very allergic to and afraid of, by the way. They don't have Rupert's attitude to it of, I don't care. What happens to, for example, Matt Goodwin if he doesn't win the Gorton and Denton by-election? These people are I think, worried that their political project has been very precarious. And I think that's betrayed by the fact that senior people in Reform, back when I was still allowed in the club in late 2024, were describing the party to me as a Ming vase. They see their strategy as carrying a delicate antique over the electoral finish line by 2029. And I did warn them, if by the time you cross that finish line, the people holding the vase have been replaced with people who don't believe in the reason you're carrying the vase in the first place, then you'll get to the finish line and you'll drop the vase. And I think we're actually seeing Reform risking dropping the vase before the finish line, and I think their media surrogates and supporters are worried about it, and that is playing out in their behaviour and their antibody reaction to the presence of Restore Britain. And that was on display in this debate with young Bob, who, as the kids are saying, mogged Alex Phillips here.
Immigrants have come here, leave again.
But it doesn't matter about whether it's practical or not. Millions must go. I mean, if you look at the current state of the country, it cannot continue. Even the Prime Minister admitted it. We've become an island of strangers.
If history is taught at any lessons whatsoever...
But your sort of ideology hasn't worked.
What is my ideology that hasn't worked,
The moderate
by the
right
way?
position of just focusing on illegal forms of migration has never worked. We've accepted, you know, if you look at the last year of the Tory government, we accepted over 1 million people. Those are people that legally came here.
I'm wholly sympathetic, as I'm sure anyone listening to this who you know has ever listened to any word that's come out of my mouth, that the immigration at the level it's been has been hugely injurious.
Those 1 million people that we took in, how are we going to sort them out? Because they're already in this country.
That is what political parties need to present to potential voters, and that is what I want to know.
So if these people take practices and have in-group preference from their communities and it doesn't adhere to the laws of the land, they should go home.
So like what?
Just to pause there and say, that's a perfect formulation. Sorry, you don't get to establish a foreign colony that is self-governing on our soil and expect to be the recipient of state resources, or expect to be advantaged over the natives in their own country via DEI legislation and the broader culture which stigmatises being white and even denies the fact that there are indigenous British ethnicities, a game that Alex has unfortunately played in the last few days. Bob is entirely correct. He has surmised the Restore Britain position, which is we will proscribe any behaviours that we dislike that are not in keeping with British traditions, and if you don't like that, go and live somewhere else. And if you break the law after they have been prescribed, you will be detained and you will be deported. The problem with Reform is they are saying, okay, we've been dragged kicking and screaming to deporting illegal immigrants, not that you can really trust their word on it because they were flip-flopped on it so many times and they're entrusting Zia Yussuf, a Muslim man, to run the Home Office, which is populated by a 700-strong Islamic network that have frustrated monitoring jihad via counter-terror program Prevent, but also tried to overturn rejected asylum decisions from Muslim countries, tried to block Christian asylum seekers, and who control legal migration policy and the advice that civil servants give to ministers to craft that policy. And Reform, at the moment, don't seem to understand what they need to do in order to regain control of the civil service. They're still allowing various quangos to stay in place and dictate economic policies we'll get onto a bit later. So the idea that Zia Yussuf is either willing or capable of battling the civil service on that issue and wants to conduct mass deportations is dubious and in doubt, especially because he was the man who called the police on Rupert Lowe because, as Nigel Farage said, Rupert Lowe wanted to conduct mass deportations. So the idea that that's worthy of calling the police on Rupert Lowe means they don't really want to do it. But okay, let's say Reform will address illegal migration. Well, what about the legal migrants that were allowed in against the express wishes of the public? They've already said they'll reverse indefinite leave to remain, but indefinite leave to remain will come due for many people by the time of the next election. So the Boris wave will be here very soon. So if those people then get citizenships, will the members of the Boris wave who are clever enough to apply for their expedited citizenship route not be removed from the country? And what about people who commit crimes in the country but have a British passport but are eligible for birthright citizenship or citizenship from their home countries that they can be bullied into being granted? For example, we can leverage sanctions and visas and foreign aid to Pakistan to make sure that they take back the perpetrators of the Pakistani grooming gangs. Or will they be stripped of their British citizenships and sent elsewhere because they shouldn't be our problem? Well, under a Reform government, they would say no. So we're stuck with all these people. Under a Restore government, that's a yes. Your offer is either stop the water coming into the ship and continue sinking, or patch up the hole and bail out the water and continue to sail the seven seas. At the conclusion of this debate, though, Alex said something that got a lot of people's hackles raised, and that was she warned young Bob that his rhetoric, which I thought was very sensible and very sharp and quick-witted, was leading him down a path where he would be cancelled.
A policy of mass deportations based upon non-integration? That's my question.
For me, first of all, I've already explained it in countless detail, but of course, regardless of how painful it will be, it is necessary, so it has to happen. And we cannot have a right-wing government which capitulates this idea that this is not necessary for the sake of a broader support.
Bob, thank you ever so much for coming in. Word of warning, you're very young. You're starting out on your career. I do not want to see you blow yourself up. So just
if that happens,
tread
it means there's a
carefully.
right-wing establishment that censors people.
Right? Maybe there is. But maybe it's good Ofcom.
Bob is correct, because pretty much all the members of Restore Britain have been banned in one form or another from various channels. I mean, GB News is run like a reform fiefdom these days by Nigel Farage and Paul Marshall, which means that people like myself or Rupert Lowe have been banned for quite some time. But also, Talk has been pressured by Labour politicians or Private Eye magazine, in my case, to ban members of the commentariat because they've said things like foreign nationals and those born overseas and those without any native ancestry should not be eligible to become MPs, and they have caved to pressure campaigns from Private Eye or Ofcom to deplatform people that have been otherwise on their channel for years and very popular with their listenership. I mean, I got my start in broadcast media on Talk, so it's a shame that I have seemingly been blacklisted after that cancellation attempt. And also, it's not just Ofcom. It's that there is a monopoly at the moment among media magnates on backing reform, and so any perceived threat to reform will only be allowed on in a limited hangout to try to discredit it, and I think Alex has not done a very good job of that when confronted by Restore Britain's representatives, or they will just be not allowed on the platform to make their own case, and instead reforms surrogates, because Alex herself has been a long-time friend and confidant of Nigel's. She's always said that she's loved Nigel. Or Isabel Oakeshott, who is one of Talk's leading political reporters, who is engaged to Richard Tice after both of them had affairs and left their respective families to be together. They will instead chat amongst themselves and have a good old chinwag about reform's prospects and how Restore Britain is doomed to fail.
It's just gibberish.
Yeah.
It's not grown-up politics. It's absolute BS. It's stinking moronic idiocy of people who live in weird chat rooms. It's becoming some of these followers. His followers are turning him into the Andrew Tate of politics. It's become an angry young men's sort of, I don't know, strange circulatory squad.
Yeah.
The Andrew Tate of politics. Sure, Alex. Alex then took to X after writing a long and disparaging Substack post insinuating that Restore Britain were a Trojan horse for Nazis to get into Downing Street, saying, if any of these Restore trolls think I'm going to regret my interviews probing on how their ethno-nationalist stance would be prosecuted as policy or kowtow to their actual racism, or am cowed or deterred as a result of their violent language online and misogynistic attacks, their edited clips, vile memes and pile-ons, think again. I am glad that I am shining a light into their dark, incel-esque underworld, and onto what this movement seems to be attracting. It is not pretty. Sorry, I'm not going to read the rest of this because this is farcical. Incel-esque? I mean, again, make up your mind. They the Andrew Tate of politics, running brothels and boasting about their harem of women and their fleet of Bugattis? Or are they basement-dwelling, pizza-faced trolls who can't get girlfriends? And also, it's just not true, because Charlie Downs is married, I'm married, Rupert Lowe's been married for 40 years, and that's more than can be said of those leading reform, as Alex well knows, many of whom are divorced or have cheated on their spouses and been philanderous in their personal lives. And that's just what's been publicised, by the way. And I pointed this out to Alex, and again, it brings me no pleasure to have to do this. And ratio former friends and disclose private conduct, but they are firing the first shot and they're saying things they know not to be true. And worse still, they're slandering people that they know in person, that they've met, that they've verified the good characters of, like Rupert Lowe, like Charlie Downs, like myself by association, for the sake of keeping their political project on track. And so, if people are prepared to be dishonest, disloyal, disreputable, in order to seek and achieve political power, those are the exact kind of people that I do not want to entrust with political power, because those are the exact kind of people that have been in political power for my entire lifetime. And so I said, Alex, this was absurd. You were invited to my wedding. Downs is married, Rupert's been married for 40 years, and that's more than can be said at the philanderers leading reform. You've resorted to inane name-calling and laundering the same smears the establishment used to cover up sex crimes against women and children. You were vociferous in speaking out against this on Talk, and for your documentary on the New Culture Forum, which she came on Deprogrammed and discussed with myself and Harrison, so she knows we're sincere about that too. You didn't hold back from criticising Islam and punitive practices against women like the burqa and niqab. We've walked down the high street together in Earl's Court, where you were leered at and followed before. We both know these men shouldn't be here. So when Restore comes along and recognises the fact that the British people are comprised of the English, Welsh, Scottish and Irish, and promises to prescribe such practices and remove such men without mistreating good people, you call people you've known all the names you can think of when you know they aren't true. Restore Britain is promising to do exactly what you want. Rupert actually delivered a rape gang inquiry. Nigel promised to, then didn't. So the attacks just come off as you defending your sunk costs in reform. I get it. You love Nigel. You've always said as such. You've protested his innocence when Zia reported Rupert to the police. You've been friends and colleagues with the leadership of reform for a long time. But they have behaved unconscionably towards Rupert, aren't taking a stand against Islam, and won't remove from our country men who put our wives, sisters, mothers, daughters, and friends, like you, Alex, at risk. We're going to do that, and calling us names won't change our minds. And the reaction, might I add, has been seismic, because Alex has far more followers than I do. She has a mainstream media, broadcast network, TV station, show, and got far more views, and I'm not saying that Twitter likes are the measure of good politics, but it is showing that Restore have an organic momentum, and that, more importantly, the attacks from reform aren't landing because of the people they're coming from, and because the angles of attack are just the same smears and slurs, Nazi, fascist, racist, incel, that are levelled by who are meant to be our shared enemies and have been levelled at reform in the past, so members of reform should know better. Now, of course, Alex will say that this ratio and Restore Britain's unfathomable success, 40 million plus views on Rupert's launch video compared to 1 million on Farage's only a couple of years ago, is due to things like Indian bots. This is something she said for a long time, and she hasn't produced the receipts for that yet. She could well be right. She has a background in data analytics. However, until I see differently, I won't believe it. Remember, Farage said that the idea that he wasn't for mass deportations was misinformation sponsored by Indian bots, when it was just what he said to Stephen Edgington in that infamous interview. So reform have been willing to misrepresent the impact of Indian bots on our politics. And also, I'm sorry to go here, but if you're so worried about foreign interference from Indian bots, then why are you appointing so many foreigners, Nadim Zahawi, Zia Yussuf, Laila Cunningham, as your frontline political representatives? Anyway, Alex said, for anyone who doesn't understand the sophistication of politics, and this actually isn't even sophisticated but crude, which is quite condescending and unnecessary, the emergent new right-wing splinter party Restore will get massively amplified by bots. This is to harm reform and split the vote. Again, make up your mind. Does nobody know who Rupert Lowe is, so he doesn't represent a threat, and so he isn't splitting the vote? Or is Restore a credible threat, and will split the vote? Are Restore just a fringe faction of online neo-Nazis, who won't have any real-world electoral translation? Or will they cleave Reform's vote in half, possibly replacing it in the polls, but still fail to form a majority government, and so a Liberal, Labour, Green coalition will be in power and the country will be ruined? Make up your mind. Yet again, this is why the angles of attack aren't landing from Reform surrogates, because they're confused and the rhetoric they're using is the language of the enemy. And it also isn't landing because it's generating responses from the likes of Melissa Chen, who, if you don't know, is the girlfriend, fiancé, I'm not sure, of Winston Marshall, son of Paul Marshall. So she is Paul Marshall's de facto daughter-in-law, and Paul Marshall runs not just GB News, but also he's trying to buy the Telegraph, and Nadim Zahawi was brokering the Telegraph deal back when Redbird Capital, the investment firm based in Dubai, which explains why Nigel Farage keeps jetting back and forth there, who bought the Spectator and gave it to Marshall as part of his media empire. He was trying to negotiate the deal between Redbird Capital buying the Telegraph and giving it to Paul Marshall. Paul Marshall also owns the Art Conference, which both Kemi Badenoch and Nigel Farage has spoken at before, and of course there are members of the Reform Coalition who are urging a Tory merger, and as well the accusation that Reform have become Tories 2.0 because they've taken so many Tory defectors, including Boris Johnson's cabinet members, and made them members of Reform's shadow cabinet. And so when Melissa Chen say it will be boosted and funded by foreign influence campaigns, the CCP have groomed Tory, Lib Dem and Labour elites since the 1950s. Reform being so close to sweeping UK elections is a nightmare for them. They don't have their assets in place since this is a new set-up party. Best way to disrupt Reform is to fund Restore and make sure Reform doesn't get into power. I would heavily scrutinise the donations and funding sources. This doesn't pass muster when Nigel Farage is being flown out to Dubai by the sheikhs of the Emiratis and shaping his policy, foreign and domestic, around the priorities of members of the UAE elite in order to attract foreign investment. As well as, not being funny, your de facto father-in-law controlling pretty much all the right-wing media in the country and creating a complete and ubiquitous media blackout for anything that isn't pro-reform. The attacks don't land. The attacks from the Reform camp are either outright projection or laundering the same smears that they complained enemy parties like Labour, Lib Dems, the Greens and the Tories have used to cover up scandals like the rape gangs for decades. Pick a lane, guys. It's either you're the British Patriotic Party who isn't taking foreign funding and isn't amplified by foreign bots and foreign interference, and you're not the party that's going to keep using the tired old tropes of you're a racist, you're a sexist, you're an anti-Semite, you're far right, or you are an establishment party, you're going to take funding from the UAE, you're going to associate yourselves with foreign nations and incorporate foreign politicians because that advantages you in foreign policy, you're going to take advantage of a media empire that has a near blackout on people who are even minorly critical of you, and you're going to call anyone to your right rather just occupying the anti-establishment opinions that your own supporters thought you held and no longer hold, you're going to call them all racists, just like Tony Blair would. And so this is why it's very important that Charlie Downs went on Talk and said the following about the attempts to smear Restore Britain using guilt by association, allowing anonymous or even large and provocative accounts to speak for the party and try to make the party answer for some of the things either its supporters or people posing as its supporters, more importantly, have said.
What about this allegation that was just made by Mayer in there as well, and a few others have made this point, that you are dancing with some pretty iffy characters as well, the kind of Britain First brigade, those who are in a far more extreme, not necessarily illegal, but a very extreme area of the right-wing spectrum, that those voices are being entertained, or at least they're not being dissuaded. And in fact, I think he said that Rupert even engages with some of those voices too.
Like whom?
Well, he made the point.
Well, no, but I'm asking you, like, if you would care to name a specific individual, then I can talk about it. But if we're just going to have a vague conversation about anonymous accounts on Twitter...
No, I would agree with you. That was the allegation he made and said that, you know, Charlie's party is doing this kind of thing. Is that's something you don't recognise as an issue that is affecting Restore?
Well, look, if we're discussing just anonymous accounts on the internet, I'm just simply not interested in that line of argument. If we're talking about specific individuals or organisations, then what I would say is if the person or organisation in question is not doing anything illegal and is not an elected representative of the public, then what we're talking about is just a British citizen. And I would encourage Mayorin to talk to that person directly, or indeed, Ian, for you to have that person on your show if you want to talk about their views.
Indeed.
Because what I'm here to do is to talk about Restore Britain's views. And we're not in the business of disavowing random members of the public for the temerity of supporting our party.
Pausing there, phenomenal framing by Charlie. We're not in the business of disavowing random members of the public, because what other people say cannot be our responsibility, because it would be unfair to hold anyone to account for something that someone else says because it's beyond their control. And so, unless it comes from the mouth of Restore Britain, who have made their immigration policy explicitly clear, it's in a 110-page document, which we'll be going through at length in a forthcoming video on this channel, but is available on Restore Britain's website. Unless it comes from the mouth of Rupert Lowe, one of Restore's representatives, or from written policy, which is there in black and white, it is not Restore Britain's position. Restore Britain cannot be made to answer for it, and anyone telling you that their position is anything other than what has been said or printed on the internet or in even the physical paper that I hold in my hands right here, anyone telling you that their position is anything other than that is either ignorant or lying to you. And we do not endorse any ungentlemanly conduct that Rupert himself would not engage in. So this is just a reminder to supporters who, believe me, we share your anger. We wouldn't take such a strong stance on these issues otherwise. Just a reminder to keep things polite, don't sink to the level of insults, never pick fights, finish them because we have the facts on our side, only speak the truth, focus on the issues, and do as Rupert does, because if his announcement video resonated with you because it had the gentlemanly English country aesthetics, then squabbling and throwing needlessly cruel or invective language around is unbecoming of us. Also, as a final point, if we are in the business of promoting free discourse and free speech, then we should not engage in the ritualistic denunciation and cancellation games that we decry happen in the purity spiraling woke left. And so, even though we only agree with our own position, and any position other than our own is not ours, and so we do not agree with it, and we encourage those who agree with us to vote for Restore, we are not interested in sitting around and creating bogeymen on behalf of people in the media or other parties or the broader establishment which moves in lockstep to crush dissent. We are not in the business of creating bogeymen that they can beat us with. So if we disagree with a person online who is prominent and vocal and holds a position that is not ours, take it up with them. Don't try to make Restore Britain answer for that. And for those people who do not want to put the faces of Restore Britain, who are on the front line taking fire because they're over the target, in a difficult position where their media will try to make them answer for rhetoric that is not their own, yet again, consider, be gentlemanly, don't throw insults around. Let's win this with our heads held high and the truth on our side.
We do have Mr. Farage as well, who's happy to kind of make that point. We had a message from Angela a little earlier who suggested that attracting far-right, some quite nasty characters is that you don't recognise that way of defining what you guys are about. And I'm merely just putting that to you, Charlie.
Well, Ian, as you know, we now have 70,000 members nationwide, which in just less than a week is an unprecedented achievement in British politics. And if you look at the polling around the policies that we are offering the British people, these are widely supported, very mainstream, very popular positions outside of the M25, outside of the Westminster bubble, things like reintroducing the death penalty, reversing mass immigration, deporting all illegal migrants, and all the rest of it. These are very, very normal, very popular positions. So yes, there may be some figures who hold some, some controversial views who support our party, but there's also a great many more very ordinary people, many of whom didn't vote at the last election, by the way, who support our positions. And so all I would say here is that the real political dichotomy in 2026 in Britain is not left versus right, it is establishment versus anti-establishment.
Okay.
And Reform UK, over the last 48 hours particularly, with Laila Cunningham, their Mayor of London candidate, calling me personally and our party a neo-Nazi organisation, and Mayorin just then trying to engage in some kind of guilt by association tactic, they have revealed themselves to be part of the Westminster liberal establishment, because they clearly can't win the argument on the grounds of principle and fact, and so they have resorted to these low left-wing smear tactics. And to that, I would say, I would encourage the British public, and particularly Reform UK members watching this show right now, to ask themselves whether they want people who would be prepared to engage in such low tactics running our country.
Phenomenal from Downs there, and it's always worth remembering for Restore supporters that we hold the positions that the majority of the British public already hold. They just need to hear that we hold them. We don't need invective or our passions to get the better of us, because we're well over 80,000 members now. It's been an incredible week and the support has been phenomenal. We don't need to let our emotions get the better of us. Deep breath in, do as Rupert does, and the truth is on our side. And it's actually our enemy's overreaction, their histrionic hand-waving and shouting and throwing out slurs and smears, which discredits them rather than us. If you want to meme and make jokes, edit them in Rupert's wheelbarrow or something. Otherwise, let's keep it calm out there, ladies and gentlemen, and keep up the good work. And Reform have done us all a favour by outing themselves as firmly a part of the establishment. Robert Jenrick had promised when he was in the Conservative Party, making videos of him confronting fare bumpers and saying that Birmingham has been an integration failure because people are living in Pakistani ghettos. I was thinking, wow, the guy's a true Damascene convert. And then he was made Shadow Chancellor by Nigel Farage. Now, first of all, he's playing the man out of the position because Robert Jenrick was most effective when he was Shadow Justice Minister under the Conservatives. He used to work in the Home Office, so all the talk of we need people with experience, well, Jenrick has little to no experience in the Treasury. He's also a trained lawyer, not an economist. And so it seems that he's just been put in the position because he is the most likely person to win an election among the leadership if Nigel Farage were to be chucked under the Brexit bus tomorrow. So this seems to be nepotistic, and it also seems to be a matter of attracting investment in the key sectors that Nigel Farage has expressed his interest in before, namely crypto, data centres, and AI. But we will get onto that in a moment, because in his first speech, Robert Jenrick has already realigned Reform UK back towards the establishment, because he has said he will keep the Bank of England independent, something Gordon Brown did when he was Tony Blair's Chancellor in 1997. And independent, by the way, just means unaccountable, because elected ministers can no longer change the head of the Bank of England, despite their chronic mismanagement of the country's gilts, its assets, and their own pension funds, putting it majority in liability-driven investments, causing the insolvency crisis ahead of Liz Truss's mini-budget, which led to Liz Truss becoming the scapegoat and kicked out of office. And despite gilt rates being much higher under Rachel Reeves than under Liz Truss, the markets didn't bellyache because they know that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves are their guys. So the Bank of England can just coup out elected ministers and prime ministers. Well, then it's not that they're independent, it's that they are unaccountable. And Reform want to keep that unaccountability, despite proclaiming wanting to shake up how the bond markets are run, despite Richard Tice saying he doesn't want to service the debt that the Bank of England have racked up running a deficit in our country, with growth shrinking to 0.1% per quarter. And as well, Robert Jenrick has said he wants to keep the Office for Budget Responsibility, the quango instantiated by David Cameron in the austerity years, not that austerity actually happened, because NHS and welfare spending continued to escalate with universal credit being created, and now $15 billion a year being spent on foreign nationals claiming universal credit, and 25% of the working age population on out-of-work benefits. The benefits bill has just ballooned under 14 years of Tory austerity. It's a total lie told by the Green Party and Labour to cover their arse. But the Office for Budget Responsibility didn't just leak confidential briefs to the media ahead of Liz Truss's mini-budget to sabotage it. Their modelling has been consistently wrong for decades. They have got net migration wrong by a factor of 2 to 3, estimating it was going to be 245,000 a year under the Boris wave, when it was closer to $1 million. And, as well, under Liz Truss, they said that her tax-cutting measures would not bring in nearly the tax receipts that actually came through, even after Liz Truss reversed many of her tax cuts. So, the economy would have done far better has Liz Truss stuck to her guns, not sacked Kwasi Kwarteng, and been betrayed by the Bank of England, the OBR, and her own party. We would be in a far better state financially today than under Rishi Sunak and Rachel Reeves. And that is the OBR's fault, and Robert Jenrick wants to keep that. Why is that? Well, turns out that when Robert Jenrick gave his speech, he texted George Osborne, David Cameron's Chancellor, who instantiated the OBR, who is well within the establishment. He's basically like a character in Jack Kirby's Source Wall in DC Comics. He's just fixed to it now. He also, by the way, is on the board of OpenAI, so makes sense why they're keeping that relationship alive. Robert Jenrick texted his speech to George Osborne saying he hopes he approved of it. George, trust you well, here's a copy of speech I gave today on the economy. It commits the OBR into fiscal responsibility, which I hope you approve of. Why is Robert Jenrick seeking the approval of the previous Conservative government, who he is supposedly repudiating by joining Reform, who ruined our country? Why does he want that government to approve of his fiscal policy? Because his fiscal policy is a continuity of the last Tory government, of the establishment. And so, when Robert Jenrick, during his Conservative leadership election, was described as positioning himself as someone with the polish of David Cameron and the politics of Nigel Farage, it turns out it was the other way around. He is the policies of David Cameron with the presentation of Nigel Farage. Reform have just become the Tories in teal. And that's even more obvious by their Foreign Secretary-in-Waiting, Nadim Zahawi, celebrating the appointment of the Queen of Woke, Antonia Romeo, as the first ever female cabinet secretary and head of the civil service under Keir Starmer. She is now the most senior civil servant in the country. She has the power to basically ruin ministers' careers, and she is incapable of being gotten rid of because the Civil Service Code is instantiated into law under the 2010 Constitutional Reform and Governance Act, which Reform UK have not committed to repealing, meaning the civil service will run rings around them, especially if these independent quangos stay in place, and so they can't fire and rehire members of the civil service, so they might be stuck with Antonio Romeo still supervising the Cabinet Office and the civil service should they get into government. They think members of their front bench, people who have been celebrated as Tory defectors by Nigel Farage, they think that this is a good appointment. Now, to get an idea of Antonio Romeo's career history, we turn to Stephen Edgington's tweet here, which actually Richard Tice retweeted, and Zia Yussuf didn't approve of her appointment, by the way. So there's dissent in the Reform ranks. You might say, oh, Reform aren't all on the same page about this. But then why would you invite Tory defectors into your ranks that think an independent Bank of England, the existence of the OBR, George Osborne's fiscal policy, and Antonio Romeo's supervision of the civil service are all good things? Like, you're infighting before you're even sat around the cabinet table, guys. This does not bode well for governance. Antonio Romeo's career includes being at the Home Office since April 2025, where more than 65,000 illegal migrants have entered Britain, and mass legal migration has continued. She's been dubbed the Queen of Woke at the Department of International Trade, with weekly emails on trans and non-binary and bi-visibility days. She is the senior responsible officer for the Ministry of Justice's probation privatisation, costing hundreds of millions of pounds, and of course overseeing the overcrowding of Britain's prisons, and which led to the early release scheme. She is the civil service gender champion. She blogged about male allyship, supported Stonewall, campaigned on menopause awareness while leading the Ministry of Justice, Home Office and Department for Trade. She was accused of bullying in New York City. She urged staff to add pronouns, watched the trans film Seahorse, and flew the trans flag over headquarters. Bear in mind, this is one of the things that Suella Braverman tried to stop at the Home Office. She tried to tell Rishi Sunak to stop them flying the Trans Progress Pride flag over the Home Office, and now you have Nadim Zahawi, defecting to Reform UK, who wanted a mass amnesty of illegal migrants in 2013, and pushed for vaccine passports and vaccinations while Boris Johnson's vaccine minister. You now have him celebrating the appointment of Antonio Romeo despite all of these things that she's done, deliberately undermining Suella Braverman when she was Home Secretary in the same government as Nadim Zahawi. What's going on, guys? Reform UK have become a part of the establishment. She also told officials to double down on supporting BLM, promoted Guardian articles attacking Brexit, allowed civil servants to attend Tai Chi and calligraphy workshops during office hours, oversaw the Brexit Trade Department, delivering mostly rollover EU deals and no US trade deal, allowing Keir Starmer to claim that win for some reason, and she spent £31,000 of taxpayer money on transatlantic flights commuting from NYC to London and £100,000 on kids' schooling. As even Aaron Bastani has pointed out, Robert Jenrick saying reform backed the triple lock and the OBR, and I would add to that the independence of the Bank of England and the appointment of Antonio Romeo as Cabinet Secretary and head of the Civil Service, is what elite capture of a populist right-wing party looks like. Reform have become a part of the establishment. They lost moral credibility, for me, not just when they reported Rupert Lowe to the police, but especially when Nigel Farage, when confronted with it, doubled down, justified it, said it was brutal, but that's the way it's got to be, admitting he tried to ruin the man's life and put him in prison on false charges because they disagreed on mass deportations. And now, their surrogates in the media are crashing out about Restore Britain because they know that they've taken in too many Tory defectors and they've capitulated too much to the establishment. They've made too many compromises to get to the front line of politics and have become unrecognisable by the time they've carried that Ming vase over the finish line. And we're still 3 years out from an election. So many things can change. Reform have changed unrecognisably since the last election, and it hasn't even been 2 years yet. And so they have been ideologically captured by foreign and moneyed interests and the same failures and familiar faces from the last Conservative government. Hell, I've heard that Munira Mirza, Boris Johnson's former advisor, married to Dougie Smith, the master of dark arts in the Conservative Party that used to run swingers parties in stately homes and then, for some reason, became in charge of candidate selection at Conservative headquarters. Munira Mirza, who was the first person to resign, by the way, from Downing Street, causing the cascade and the undoing of Boris Johnson's government, who recently was working in 10 Downing Street for Keir Starmer. I've heard that she's floating around Reform UK at the moment because she runs an organisation called Civic Future, training up future civil servants. These are the kinds of people they're getting into bed with. This is not good, guys. Reform UK have become the establishment. They've capitulated too much, too often, and the moment you probe them on having betrayed their own principles from the last election, they resort to shouting the smears of the establishment. Racist, sexist, incel, anti-Semite, far-right. I mean, we're 1 month away from them calling us Islamophobic at this point. So you have to ask yourself, is this what we want? We're well aware the establishment is going to come for us. As Rupert says, this isn't even the worst of it. Because stay on guard, and this is why we should be polite, straightforward, and considerate in our rhetoric. Because it helps us weed out who the saboteurs are. And it's not just going to be from enemy parties, the broader establishment, the media, members of the public who take matters into their own hands and pose as Restore supporters to cause trouble. It's going to be from the intelligence agencies. I might remind you that under Boris Johnson, the Covert Human Intelligence Sources Criminal Conduct Act of 2021 was passed, in which it makes provisions for, and in connection to, the authorization of criminal conduct in the course of, or otherwise in connection with, the conduct of covert human intelligence sources. Translation, it deputizes government agencies, civil servants, and even charities working with government partners to commit crimes pursuant to the national economic interest. So that means that, for example, if government considers diversity our strength and mass migration to be the lifeblood of Britain's economy, any party that's promising to stop that, let alone reverse it like Restore Britain is, will be considered an enemy of the state, and civil servants, members of the intelligence agencies, the police and charities, like Hope Not Hate, will be deputized and can do anything they like, including breaking the law, pursuant to sabotaging our electoral chances. We need to be on watch for this stuff. In Section 5, subsection 5, it describes a criminal conduct authorization being necessary on grounds falling within this subsection, in the interests of national security, for the purpose of preventing or detecting crime or of preventing disorder, or in the interests of the economic well-being of the United Kingdom. Managing community cohesion was the reason they covered up the rape gangs. Do you really think they won't infiltrate the party led by the man who privately funded and conducted a rape gangs inquiry and revealed just a modicum of the complicity of the establishment in the worst child abuse scandal in British history? We have to be very vigilant for this stuff. And if you see the organisations that can be deputised to commit criminal activity pursuant to those goals, it includes any police force, the National Crime Agency, the Serious Fraud Office, any intelligence service, any of Her Majesty's Armed Forces, Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, the Department of Health and Social Care, the Home Office, very important given they've been funding Hope Not Hate for a long time, the Ministry of Justice, the Competition and Markets Authority, the Environment Agency, the Financial Conduct Authority, the Food Standards Agency, and the Gambling Commission. Imagine a party that wants to liquidate most of these bodies, that would be willing to, I don't know, bulldoze Home Office headquarters and start afresh. Imagine the vengefulness with which these organisations will go after that political party. So, anytime you see some rhetoric from someone posing as a Restore Britain supporter and saying something that would be unpalatable to the British public, that is out of step with Restore Britain stated positions, it pays to be paranoid that that person is an agent of subversion trying to scupper our chances on behalf of the state. For example, Hope Not Hate are still enmeshed with the government. As Toby Young points out here, Nick Lowles was a member of the Home Office's Commission for Countering Extremism, along with Dame Sarah Khan, whose sister runs Raiku, the Don't Look Back in Anger department at the Home Office, and has given evidence to the Intelligence and Security Committee on far-right terrorism. That means me, because they've slandered me as an anti-Semite in a number of articles now, and testified to various Home Office departments about trends in online hate. Liron Velleman, a Labour councillor who campaigned alongside Sadiq Khan and Sir Keir Starmer, appeared as a witness on behalf of the group before a parliamentary committee scrutinising the online safety bill. Bear in mind, he's now going to prison because he sent sexually explicit messages to a 13-year-old girl. So Hope Not Hate deputised a paedophile as a member of their team to testify before Parliament to shape the Online Safety Act, which purports to keep kids safe online. Ironic. Also, since 2024, since the general election, Hope Not Hate has become even more enmeshed within the Labour Party, with one of its former directors, Baroness Ruth Anderson, Ruth Smeeth, becoming a government whip. She has also been named as an intelligence asset by an American communique during WikiLeaks. Another minister with close ties to the organisation is Lord Hermer, the Attorney General, who became friends with Nick Lowles when they both worked for Searchlight, an anti-fascist group, which Hope Not Hate emerged from. They've also got a parliamentary working committee and were invited to 10 Downing Street by Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer's former chief of staff, who was mentored by Peter Mandelson. And it's not just NGOs like Hope Not Hate, who are partnered with the police and the Home Office, who have interfered in Britain's elections and smeared members of the public. It's also MI5 themselves who have sought to frustrate the efforts of actual neo-Nazi groups like the National Front or the British National Party to get elected. Noteworthy, by the way, that Nick Griffin has already come out against Restore Britain because he says it's a vessel for Zionism or something. Okay, mate. But even though Restore Britain is nothing like the National Front or the BNP, it's worthy of note that they have sabotaged those parties in the past, and also parties far more mild like UKIP, which we'll get onto in a moment. This article from Business Live shows that a former Conservative activist in the Thatcher years was deputised by MI5, a chap called Andy Carmichael, to infiltrate and sabotage the National Front. In one document, John Macaulay, the National Front's chairman, told members the job of Carmichael, if employed by MI5, was to destroy the National Front. This I am convinced of. He was praised as a remarkable man for his work in sabotaging the National Front by a former activist who confirmed he had released the documents that confirmed MI5 involvement. Carmichael embedded himself in senior ranks and was elected chairman of the West Midlands region and stood as an MP in the December 1994 Dudley West by-election. He was later blamed by the group for being instrumental in a name change which split the base. It was already riddled with infighting because such groups often attract antisocial personality types that are just a headache to be involved with, as well as a lot of their views being, of course, objectionable. Nobody in Restore Britain is a fan of Adolf Hitler. I don't think that's particularly controversial. Anyway, they were already riddled with infighting, and when they split over the name change, Ian Anderson formed the National Democrats as various factions spluttered to an end over the following years. So Carmichael was pushing for the name change, which then divided their efforts and caused them to squabble among themselves. Senior MI5 officers were even uneasy about the level of involvement they had in the National Front because they felt they had sabotaged an election, and this was anathema to democracy working properly. Now, one might argue that it is in the ultimate good of the country that an actual neo-Nazi party did not come to power. I'm sure plenty of people will make that argument. But given the inflation of the term Nazi over the last few years, remember we started off this segment by Laila Cunningham calling Restore Britain, my friend Charlie Downs, and I suppose myself and Rupert Lowe by implication, neo-Nazis. Do you really think that the even further left ideologically captured security apparatuses and the civil service who have been deputised to commit crimes pursuant to what they think is in the national interest or preventing disorder, following things like campaigns outside migrant hotels to get them shut down, do you not think they would also regard someone like Rupert Lowe as a Nazi and therefore deputise someone to infiltrate the party, either using social media accounts? This is something the 77th Brigade does. It's the cyber warfare division of the British military, and they use bot accounts to promulgate certain opinions, combat misinformation, and boost certain perspectives online. Manufacturing consent using hashtags, especially in the aftermath of terror attacks. Or do you not think they would send someone in person, even try to install someone at the top of the party hierarchy? Is it possible this has even happened in Reform UK? Which would explain their drifting towards being incorporated as part of the establishment. And this is not beyond the question. As Douglas Murray pointed out a number of years ago, they infiltrated UKIP. Journalist Norman Tebbit, writing in The Spectator, was tipped off by an aggrieved member of UKIP in the early 2000s that the party was wasting resources on by-elections it would never win, and that it was being directed to do so by someone he suspected was involved with MI5. And Norman Tebbit ran this through a source who had previously worked for the security agencies, and they recognised this person after a visit to UKIP headquarters. And they found out that they had also hired another person in UKIP who had previously worked for MI5. They had also worked for Jimmy Goldsmith's Referendum Party, who Rupert Lowe had, of course, stood as an MP for in 1997. And when Norman Tebbit rang up UKIP headquarters to ask if this person was still working for the intelligence agencies, he got a furious no comment and the phone being put down on him, which is as good as confirmation because, of course, active field agents can neither confirm nor deny their involvement with British security state. As Tebbit writes, since Attlee's Labour government helped create NATO, all three major parties have agreed that membership of that alliance is in the British interest. Through the 1950s, 1960s and 70s, those opposing membership were regarded as certainly misguided and possibly subversive. A party whose sole raison d'etre is British withdrawal from the EU, or NATO, might be regarded as subversive. Already New Labour equates patriotism with membership and describes calls for withdrawal as unpatriotic. So given the broad definition of what constitutes British values, who can be called a Nazi, what is in the national interest given those populating the state now think diversity is our strength, do you really think it's beyond the realm of possibility that the security state could try to infiltrate and sabotage Restore Britain? Or Reform UK, for that matter? And so, be vigilant. Recognise that when Restore Britain are over the target, they're going to come under fire. From Reform surrogates in the media, from Reform UK officials, from the government, from the civil service, from the security state, from all sorts of people disingenuously posing as our supporters online. I've already seen a few accounts claiming to be Restore Britain and trying to give the party bad press. Just dismiss them with a don't care, calling us names won't change our mind, and say hello to your handlers at GCHQ and MI5 for me. Because Rupert's project, as he made clear in his recent interview to David Starkey, is to, by 2029, give the British people a credible alternative, a substantive anti-establishment option to vote for, that isn't populated by the same stewards of managed decline that sat in government years prior and either did nothing or actively accelerated the rate to which our country has been brought to the precipice of extinction. And so keep your heads held high, keep your rhetoric clean, your conduct gentlemanly, and respond to the smears from Reform UK with a simple don't care, because the restoration of Britain will be difficult, but it is necessary.